I was thinking that I'm pushing, and I don't think it was me thinking it, I think God was saying, you don't need to push that fast. So what I did is inserted some things I thought were important that are tied to last week, and we hope we'll get as far with Job as we can, and then next week there's another piece I want to insert into there, and we'll look at Paul's life, and then we actually will go to the Beatitudes when we finish that, okay? But I think this is going to be a good preparation for looking at the Beatitudes, okay? So the very first lesson, so this is lesson 3, the very first lesson we looked at the fall, and what did we say was lost in the fall?
Humility.
Humility.
Innocence.
Innocence. And this is a key one, and we went through that, what? Did I spell it wrong?
I think so.
No,
I think there's no
spelling is memorization. And I don't use words, and so I
but
don't.
you know,
I
I'm
don't use
not-
words. I
Part
don't
of my
use
job is to give you a hard time.
It is,
so-
I'm thankful, because I didn't even know how, no S?
I think
No
all you
S.
have to do is underline it. Spell check will, yeah, see,
There you go.
Spell check.
You know.
Yeah, I'm just a little squiggly line,
Yeah,
Janet. That's
exactly,
all we can
that's
worry about.
right, okay, that works. Okay, so the main thing that we talked about, that was the first use of the word blessing as well. And what did blessing, first use, chapter 1, mean?
To bend the knee.
Bend the knee. And why that meaning? Why, what's attached to that meaning that supports our discussion on the fall?
You're humbling yourself.
Where? Humbling yourself, and that is true, and where specifically?
Before God.
Yep. And I actually think because they didn't know different, it not only was before God, but it was also with each other. Okay. Then we jumped last week, lesson 2, to Matthew 11, 28 through 30. And Jesus is described as being what in heart?
Gentle.
Here.
Gentle and lowly in heart. And we said those mean what?
I can spell Gentile, but not gentle.
Gentile? I didn't do that.
No, I'm saying, I'm just like, spell gentle.
I wouldn't be surprised though.
Approachable,
Approachable.
accepting.
This characteristic here, approachable, makes Jesus approachable, accepting. The definition that I learned for gentle was the right amount of power expressed in the right way. And it's a completely different definition than what we think about, because when we hear gentle, what do we think?
Weak.
Submissive, yeah, we.
Yeah, so it's the right amount of power. It's power under control. The right amount of power expressed in the right way. Okay, so then we jump from, these are the two main verses from last week. This one in Matthew 11, 28 through 30, and then we looked at Philippians 2, 5 through 10. And in there were 3 characteristics of Jesus as God, and 3 characteristics of Jesus as a man. So he's fully God and fully man. Now, if you had to summarize what we talked about, what would you say?
He was subservient to God.
Okay, he was a servant to God in the Godhead. And we looked at verses that showed how he continued to say, I don't do anything that God hasn't told me to do. And everything I'm teaching came from God. Okay, so this is Philippians 2, 5 through 10. And this verse, Elena, kept running through my head too, because you pointed out we needed to emphasize this more. What was it that you said we needed to emphasize more?
Have this attitude about yourselves,
Yeah, have this attitude. And what was that attitude?
that attitude of humility.
Attitude of humility. And then we also said last week in Matthew 11, 28 through 30, Jesus could have said anything about who he is. And he chose those two characteristics. So in Philippians 2, 5 through 10, we find out again so he was submissive in the Godhead. And then what other things did we see?
He's gonna be exalted.
He will be exalted. And every knee will bow. Huh? Okay? Every knee will bow. Just like that word blessing in Genesis 1, in verse 10. But what else do we see about Jesus here as far as his humility? How did he humble himself?
The way he came in his appearance to the world, he didn't come in as royalty. He
Yeah.
came-
He looked like a person, he looked like a man, and we saw that he was treated like a man. And there's all kinds of statements in the Bible where people said stuff to him like you wouldn't say that to God if you really believed you were talking to God. You know, like the rumor that his mom got pregnant outside of wedlock, basically. I mean, that was John 8. They floated that at him. So that's the kinds of things that he dealt with. We also saw that his humility took him where?
To the cross.
To the cross. What did you say?
I said that.
Oh, yeah, death. So death on the cross. And we talked about his humility, that he looked like a man. His humility, he took stuff from people that he created. We talked about the love that caused him to humble himself to death on the cross. So how would you finish this sentence? Jesus never would have died if not for his creation.
Father's plan.
Obedience.
Okay.
Humility.
He never would have died if it wasn't for his humility. And that's a pretty profound thing for us to think about. And again, all of this is preparation for us to look at the Beatitudes. So we're going to dig into that a little bit more. Let's turn to Matthew 20. And this isn't the only time this happened, but let's read 20 through 24.
Then the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus with her sons. She knelt respectfully to ask a favor. "What is your request?" he asked. She replied, "In your kingdom, please let my 2 sons sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left." But Jesus answered by saying to them, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I am about to drink?" "Oh yes," they replied, "we are able." Jesus told them, "You will indeed drink from my bitter cup, but I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left. My Father has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen." When the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant.
Okay, so what motivated their mom to go, "Hey, can you put one son on the left and one son on the right in heaven?"
Right.
Absolutely. And how did the disciples respond?
They did not like it.
They didn't like it, they were indignant. What does that word mean?
Upset.
Upset. They were mad. Any kind of,
Disgusted.
Disgusted.
I was just looking.
yep, that's exactly right. That was their response. So you got 10 disciples, and guess what? If we go to the next chapter, we're gonna see that this is Jesus' entrance into Jerusalem. So what does that tell us about them as a group?
There's probably jealousy among them.
They weren't that cohesive.
Okay, could be jealousy. Ask it a better way.
No, I was saying that's good again.
Ask a better question.
How do you reform that question?
So that's how a daughter-in-law responds to her mother-in-law. I say, can you ask that again? That was a dumb question, please.
I
So-
read it in court. All the attorneys.
So, I don't remember.
Well, the reason I was saying is because I didn't understand. You said this is right before Jesus coming into Jerusalem, and so what does that mean
Thank
for
you.
the disciples as a group?
Yep.
So, I didn't understand that.
It was
Well,
all of them.
huh?
It was all of them.
It was all of them. They've already been with Jesus for a while,
Yeah,
right?
so they've been
Is this
following
not their
for-
first, like Jesus' first pass at telling them to be a servant? Okay, so let's look at,
They're jockeying for position.
they are,
What they're doing.
they are. And so I really appreciate the Bible when he tells us these human things that happen, because it helps us to understand that where they came from and what they went through. So let's read the rest of that in 25 through 28.
Keep going.
Yes, sir.
But Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many."
Okay, so here's my question. They've been doing this for a while. They've heard every sermon, virtually every word Jesus taught. This is not the first time we read some of these verses last week also. Why did they not respond differently? Why did his teaching not stick, I think is my question.
Because of human nature?
Human nature.
Trying to one up.
Yep, they were. They were trying to one-up each other.
I'd also say a form of blindness, because Jesus is pretty much telling them, you don't know what you're asking. And I think people see, like a high position as glamorous and all these things, but in reality, there's a lot of responsibility and a lot of, heartache that actually comes with the leadership, true leadership.
That's a good point. Also, what does he ask? What's the question up in the first part that you read, Austin? What was the question that he asked them, and what was their response?
If they'd be able to take all the,
Drink from his bitter cup.
And what did they say?
Yeah.
they said, yeah, we don't mind that at all.
Okay, how many of them were at the cross?
Zilcho.
When?
One. Yeah.
And who was the
Jesus.
one?
Peter.
No.
Or
Somebody said it over here. Yeah, John. He was the only one. And what happened when they were in the garden? What happened to all of them?
They all fell asleep.
Scattered.
Well, when they got to get arrested,
Uh,
they did fall asleep. But when the soldiers came to arrest Jesus, what happened?
Basically ran away.
They ran away. Yeah, Peter tried to chop his ear. Oh, did chop his ear off. But they all ran away. So why did they say this to Jesus, and yet when reality hit the fan, they ran away? What made them say that to Jesus?
Pride. They didn't wanna look stupid. Or they wanted to be.
Or they
look good.
overestimated their own ability, right? They believed him. They thought he was God. They told him that, but they overestimated their own ability. Why else would Peter, who did he deny Jesus? No, I was never with him. Who was he talking to? Who was he speaking to?
The Pharisees?
No,
Just the crowd, wasn't it?
no,
Oh, children.
no.
Uh-huh.
Good guess.
Okay.
Those are all good guesses.
Yeah, the Romans.
Well, you got left.
No,
You
no,
got
no,
killed
no,
Romans.
not the Romans.
People in the Bible, that's who he's talking
It was
Like
about this tall.
servant girls.
Oh.
He is just like going crazy, swearing, no, I did never know him, I was never with him, as a servant girl. But what did he tell Jesus just a few hours before? I'm ready to die with
I will
him.
not deny you.
I will not
Never-
deny you.
Never
It
did.
said that he'll deny him 3 times before the.
Yep, that's
Crow.
exactly right. So, Andrew Murray wrote this. How impotent all external teaching and personal effort is to conquer pride or give the meek a lowly heart. For 3 years, the disciples had been in the training school of Jesus, and he told them the chief lesson, learn from me, for I am meek and lowly in heart. He more than once told them the secret of his inner life. The Son of Man came to be served, not to be served, but to serve. At the Lord's Supper, after washing their feet, they were still contending for who was the greatest. And I think sometimes we don't look at him that way. We don't look at him from that human standpoint. Let's go a little bit farther down, and I would like to turn to 2 Peter 1:4. And while you turn that, I want to read a little bit of the quote that I have down below. Time after time, Jesus spoke to them and others that humility was the path to the glory of God. The only thing that will avail is this, that the new nature, in its divine humility, take the place of the old. So what does 2 Peter 1:4 tell us?
Through these he has given us his very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature, having escaped the corruption in the world caused by evil desires.
Okay, he talks about magnificent promises, and because of those magnificent promises of God, something has taken place. And what is that?
You get to share in its divine nature.
We share in God's divine nature. Well, what does that sound like? Sorry, but
Creation where we were made in his image.
well, it does sound a little bit like that. Yep.
Humility.
It does sound like humility. Let's turn to Romans 6, because for every Christian, for every person, we should know, how did I become a partaker in God's nature? And what impact does that have on me? And it will affect the way that we talk about the Beatitudes, okay? So let's read Romans 6, because he's really going to answer this question. How does a Christian become a partaker of the divine nature? That's what the question that Paul's going to answer.
Or do you not know that as many of us as were baptized into Christ were baptized into his death? Therefore we were buried with him through baptism into death, that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so also should we walk in the newness of life. For if we have been united together in the likeness of his death, certainly we also shall be in the likeness of his resurrection. Knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him, that the body of sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves of sin.
Okay, so let's go. I got a series of questions to ask you, and we'll just go through those verses, okay? So in Romans 6:3, what happens at the point of salvation? How does Paul describe it?
We died with Christ.
And that's, okay, that's exactly right. So that word baptized is important. So we died with Christ at the point of salvation. And this is God's economy. Because it happened, back then. But at the point of, on January 25th, 1989, this event took place in my life. Okay, died with Christ. And he used the word baptized. What does that word, it's not water. It's not talking about water baptism here. What is he talking about?
Did you say like covered? in a sense?
It is, it's like if you, yeah. It is, it's actually like if you had a cloth and you were gonna put it in a color of dye, and it was red dye, and you dip that cloth into the dye, and the cloth is gonna turn red. So that's the meaning here, is that there's an association, and that association now, the cloth and the dye are mingled together, okay? So that's definitely the message that God wants us to have, and he's gonna carry that out through these next couple of verses. Okay.
And when you do that, I mean, it's like when you dye something, it doesn't come out. You can't
Yes.
remove it.
Yes, and that is the point.
And you can't remove it without destroying the thing it's in.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Okay, so we're baptized into his death. If I'm baptized into his death, what does that signify? What happened then?
Your old life is gone, where you're born into a new life.
Yep, so there's my death. Mingled, so it's like he died, I died. And that's what happens in salvation. He died, I died. And so then the next question, what happens after the death?
Raised to life.
Resurrected.
Buried. Yeah, we're buried with him. It's a real funeral. Okay, so we're buried with him, and then that's what happens after the burial.
Raised to life.
Raised to life. And how is that life described?
Freedom.
What word does Paul use?
Newness. Sorry.
Newness.
He does later, but I wasn't.
Okay.
I skipped too far.
You skipped too far ahead. Okay, so newness, what does that mean?
Got a blank slate.
Yes, definitely,
It's like being born.
yes. The person that died is raised a different person. And why is that person that is raised a different person? That's really, newness of life means what you were not before.
Cause now you have Jesus in your heart.
Exactly, and so what has happened? That's true.
You take on his nature.
Yep, you take on his nature. So that's how we become partakers of the divine nature. And who is doing the activity?
Wait, say that one more time.
Who's doing the activity?
Holy Spirit is coming in, you're accepting the Holy Spirit coming in you.
Yep. So it's all on God's end, right? Do you see any effort that a human being made in there? And then we could add what Ephesians 2:8-9 says, that even faith is a gift from God, and so that no one can what? Boast. Okay? So that's exactly, this is all God's process. And so when we think about Jesus and we think about him being humbled on the cross, what does that say about our nature? And raised to walk in newness of life.
That our nature is to be humble like he is, which I think it is interesting that in order, so there is some form of effort on our end, because we have to surrender. If we don't surrender, then we don't truly accept him. And that also is a form of humility, because once you surrender,
eternal. Okay, and we'll get into that more somewhere down the road, but, so there's a point there, okay? But I think it's really important to relate this, first of all, why did the disciples not get it? Why did disciples,
Jesus hadn't died yet.
and the Holy Spirit hadn't moved in?
Cause they were blind.
And and how much of our own frustration in life can be when we exert human effort to accomplish only what God can accomplish in our life. And the enemy's all over that because we get discouraged and frustrated and we care about those things and we fall into these traps and we do the wrong thing. And it's no different than this if it's in our own effort.
How does that work for John? I like that, it makes a lot of sense, but you have one example of someone who did die with him, was it, I don't really know that I know the details of that, but was it by choice?
John,
You said John was the one that
he was
died
the
with him?
only one at the cross.
So I guess, how does this,
He was watching. I should have clarified that.
oh, okay.
So that's a good question. So he was the only
One that
one
was there.
watching.
Yeah. Who was the, so there was were they both of the ones that died with him were criminals?
They were.
Okay.
Yeah, they were. But John was the only disciple that was actually physically present at the cross.
Man, that's new information, I didn't know
Yeah.
that a disciple died at the
Yeah,
cross.
nobody.
Been reflecting
Thank
on
you.
that for a
Yeah,
while,
well,
I was like,
sorry. Thank
man,
you.
I just don't remember that
Yeah.
part of it.
Hey, you're
whole
making it
story.
up,
He's still,
Jana.
he's
Yeah.
still scattered, he just came back.
Got it.
And watched
Yeah.
it go back.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So we wanna see the progression though, that, and let me read this, wait, there's one other word I think. If we're united in his death, what is true of his life? And we've kind of answered that, based on Romans 6. If we're united in his death, what is true of his life?
He can't die
We're
again?
Okay?
united in his life after death.
Yeah, we're united with him in his life. So that's why Paul could say the life that I now live, it's God that lives that life in me. And that's how he said it. That's why he's saying it. It's not just good Christian phraseology. He's actually coming back to this principle of when he became a believer on the Damascus Road, he became a different person, and his identity and Jesus' identity. So when you see in Christ, or though that's giving you that idea of a person and their identity, and God and Jesus are so mixed together that if you were gonna make biscuits and you put flour and eggs and whatever you put in biscuits, you mix it all together, can you pull the flour out of that? No. And you can't pull, that's what he's telling us. What does that tell us about salvation?
Can't be
It's irreversible.
It's irreversible. And what did you say?
Oh, that was that.
Oh,
Can't
okay.
take
So
credit
you
on
can't
that.
separate it.
Yeah, exactly. Is that encouraging for us
For
to
sure.
know that? And he wants us to have that security of that knowledge.
Just to let us know that even though we stumble and fall, he's always there to help us back up.
It's once saved, that identity is forged forward forever. Okay. So this is Murray again. It is only through the indwelling Christ in his divine humility that we can become truly humble. Pride is our very self in nature. All of Christ's teachings of the disciples and all their vain efforts were necessary preparation for his entering into them with divine power, to give and be in them what he had taught them to desire. In his death, burial, and resurrection, he could make himself one with those he loved and actually live their life with them, so they could live a life of humility. What do you think about that? That was very interesting. Can I read it again? I just said, what do you think about that? What do you think about what we just talked about?
Sounds very promising.
Okay? Promising. Does it put pride and humility in a different light?
Mhm.
Okay, we're gonna look at,
I think it's a good reminder, and it's kinda like, the definition you gave earlier for gentle, and kind of saying, you know, using power,
power under control.
yeah,
Right
just
about,
acknowledging that, like, all of what God is like holding that and containing it. I don't know, it's a unique concept because it's not something that we know or experience, but he has to contain all that he is for us to even be able to, you know, understand any little piece of it.
that's true, that's very true. And I think it also can be encouraging, hopeful, because can we see that maybe some areas in our life where we've struggled, that we can actually grow through those when we think about, hey, I don't have to, it's not my effort, it's not me that does this, it's him, and if him doing what he does through a life, and we're gonna get into that more as we go into the Beatitudes.
Well, you know, Jenna, the disciples ran away, and we live our lives comparing ourselves to each other, and it gives me some encouragement that, to realize that, because I ran away
Me too,
at different times,
me too.
and the disciples that were with him did.
Yep.
So it gives you some strength to go on.
Totally. Okay. Turn with me to Job. We're gonna get as far into Job as we can. And we'll look at Paul, and we're gonna look at something else next week that I think has to be added to this, and then I promise we're going to the Beatitudes. I just thought that this part of this lesson was important for us to go over, before we go there. So let's look at Job. Chapter 1, the first 3 verses. Do people read Job today? Curious.
I guess we're fixing to.
Yeah, I guess we are.
Yes.
I have read Job,
Every year.
but it's probably been 20 years.
Really? Okay.
Every year I start over from the beginning and I get to Job and then I stop.
So the answer is no.
No, I get all the
You're
way
just like,
through
oh,
Job, and then
Job,
I
breaking my
feel
heart.
sad.
Okay, got
Okay, go on.
Okay.
I'm out.
Okay. So we're gonna pick through it.
Skip Job next
and
So
we're just
we're,
gonna-
so we're still not
I
gonna
mean,
read
next
through
time
it.
I should just.
We're not
start
gonna read
after
through it all the way. Nope, we're
I'll get
not.
further that way.
But we're gonna pick through it, and for the purpose, we wanna look at his relationship with God, okay? And it's what the interaction with him and God are. Okay, so let's read Job 1 through 3.
There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the east.
Okay, so what do we know about him from these couple of verses? He was,
Blameless and upright.
and who, okay. And this is God's estimation of him.
It's
Oh,
What
that
it
was God,
Yeah.
yes, it is, but I was like, who, but when she said it was God's estimation, that's a different story than like, did
His
Job-
his
did
own
he write it?
estimation?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
This is, yes, this is own, yeah.
Yeah.
I wrote this book.
I'll fill
This is
in
my
the-
autobiography.
I'll fill in the gaps if we think John's on the cross. I'll try to fill in. I get it.
So I was really
I know, I
confused.
get it.
I was gonna be doing some reading
I
later.
know. You're gonna do fact checking, right? Okay. On that one. Okay, so he's blameless, and this is God's estimation of him, but we also find out some other things about him in these verses. What else do we
He
know
had
about him?
7 sons and 3 daughters.
So he was a dad, okay? 10 kids, okay?
He was very wealthy.
He was wealthy, and so wealthy, he was what?
The greatest.
In
man
fact,
among all the people.
the richest person in that entire area.
in that entire, okay, and he was also, oops. He was also, we aren't gonna read that, but we would find out as we read through that he's not only a dad, he is a husband, okay? So that's what we will find out about him. Now I want you to turn with me to Job chapter 29. He is in the process of talking about what his life used to be. And we're gonna get into that here in a minute, but I want you to see what his life was like, how he lived. So let's read 29, 1 through 4, and what do we find out?
Job further continued his discourse and said, Oh, that I were as in months past, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and when by his light I walked through the darkness, just as I was in the days of my prime, when the friendly counsel of God was over my tent.
Okay, so what does he say about what his life was like before?
God blessed him.
Yeah,
He was wishing he was back then,
he was,
and he was describing what it was,
what it was like.
what it was like.
Okay, and so God had blessed him, and how did what else did he say? Any other details?
Basically had an intimate relationship with him.
Yeah, he was intimate with God. And anything else?
He felt protected by God.
Okay, he felt protected. Anything else?
Says when he was in his prime, so I'm saying, thinking maybe he was younger.
Okay, yes, that would be true.
Or maybe just talking about the prime of his, just like his relationship with God.
It could be both, it
Yeah.
could. Okay, so do you get a sense for, as he's talking about that everything is as should be in his world?
Things were good.
Things were good. And, okay, so that's the message that we wanna get right at here. So let's read 7 through 9.
Well, I guess, so sorry, I'm
You're
reflecting
good.
on the way you asked the question. It implies that things are not good, as you, like, without the context.
Yeah, he was saying, in 1 through 4, he was saying how good it was.
Yeah, this is like he's looking back on his life,
Right.
he's going,
Those were the days.
those were the days, and everything was as it should be, okay?
But I guess somebody who's living through as it was, should be, that wouldn't be saying that. So I guess, when you originally asked the question, I heard it as, what is he living through now? And I feel like what he's living
Gotcha.
through now is the opposite of that, clearly based
that
on
is
his
true.
description.
That is absolutely true.
So yeah, he just lost everything. He lost all of his kids, his relationship with God, his family, all of his belongings, and he's just alone. And even his friends are like, turn him on.
Okay, and that is true. That is true, and that's where we're gonna go. But we wanna establish what his life, what his world was like before those events took place. What were you gonna say,
I was
Joe?
just gonna ask, starting in 29, is that after Satan came and was able to?
Yes, it was
Okay.
afterward. That's right, yeah.
Um,
Only the daughter-in-law has to raise her hand. What?
After all those
Yeah.
jabs.
Yeah.
I also, like, reading and when by his light I walked through darkness, it shows that it wasn't perfect, but he knew that he had God to walk through that.
Okay,
So even though it's like, yeah, it was great, and then he's still showing that there were
Okay.
dark times during that time frame, but he knew God was with him.
that's a good point. That's a good point. Okay, let's read 7 through 9. What do we find out there?
When I went out to the gate of the city, when I took my seat in the square, the young men saw me and hid themselves, and the old men arose and stood. The princes stopped talking and put their hands over their mouths, on their mouths.
So what is he saying there?
He was very respected.
He was very respected. And he used, labeled different age groups or places in life. He was a very respected man, okay? So much so that what did people do? What did you read there at the end there?
that they put their hands over their mouths, hid themselves,
The elders.
arose and stood, stopped talking.
That's
It's
everywhere.
almost like he was almost royalty,
Yeah,
like he was so well liked and well respected.
yep. So when he talked, the people listened, right? Okay, so let's read 21 through 22. Oh, I jumped the gun there. What's 21 through 22 say?
To me, they listened and waited and kept silent for my counsel. After my words, they did not speak again, and my speech dropped on them.
What's he saying?
He was wise, and they sought him out for
Okay.
wisdom.
That his words held a whole lot of weight.
Yeah, his words held, that's a good way of putting it. His words held a lot of weight. If you can't read that, I don't know why.
Just underline it. We're good.
Thank you. Okay, let's read, 29 through 14, or just 29, 14. What do we find out there?
I put on my righteousness and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban.
So what is he saying?
He was very righteous.
So when God said that he was blameless and right,
He wore his righteousness so everyone could see it though.
okay,
He lived it.
okay, okay. So there's a couple ways you could look at that. All right, so so what did Job believe? Look at 18 through 20.
I thought I will die in my own house. My days as numerous as the grains of sand. My roots will reach to the water, and the dew will lie all night on my branches. My glory will remain fresh in me, the bow ever new in my hand.
So what is he saying? That so he's reflecting there, but back then, when he looked into the future, what did he see?
Thought he had a long life.
Yeah, he thought he'd have a long life. And what did he see in that future?
It was good like it once was.
Yep.
It was just good.
This is how he looked at it. This is how he experienced life. And as he projected his life into the future, he saw the same things that were going on at that point in time. Okay? All right, so let's turn to, I want to make a point. In chapter 29, Job uses I, me, and my 52 times. 52 times, okay? In 25 verses. Okay. Let's look at Job 30. And I don't know why it's not in here. I think I may have taken it out by accident. So, in chapter 2, we find out the things that Dan was talking about come on Job. And so he loses all 10 of his kids. He loses all of his wealth. And it's like one person after another, 4 people come to him and give him the story of what he's lost. So he went from what we saw in chapter 29 to all of a sudden losing everything. Okay? So we want to look at a couple of his experiences. We're not going to read every one of these verses, but look at Job 30, verse 1. And what does he now experience with people?
Being mocked.
He's being, what does it say?
Mine says that now they mock me. Men younger than I, whose fathers would have disdained to put with my sheepdogs.
He's saying their dads were not good enough before for me to put them with my sheepdogs, and now their kids are making fun of me. Okay, what does 9 and 10 say?
And now those young men mock me in song. I have become a byword among them. They detest me and keep their distance. They do not hesitate to spit in my face.
So not only did he lose all of the things we talked about, here we see what else did he lose?
His respect.
Yeah, the respect he had in the community from people. Okay. How does Job feel? And what does he say about God in his trouble? So we're gonna read a couple of these, okay? Let's read Job 23, 1 through 7. And he's talking just for the sake of knowing. There are 4 people with him. They showed up after they heard what happened to him. And they sat with him for a week, and nobody said a word. But when they started talking, they should have gone home, because the things that they said got increasingly worse, and they're what they presumed. Job, you have to have done something wrong to cause all this trouble in your life. And they got worse and worse and worse, to the point where they were basically saying, calling him names and saying you're a liar, you're a pus-filled liar, because he had boils, oozing boils, and that's how they were talking to him. So when he's having these discourses, he's responding to one of the 4 people that are talking to him. Okay, so that's the background, but let's look at 23, 1 through 7.
Then Job spoke again. My complaint today is still a bitter one, and I try hard not to groan aloud. If only I knew where to find God, I would go to his court. I would lay out my case and present my arguments. Then I would listen to his reply and understand what he says to me. Would he use his great power to argue with me? No, he would give me a fair hearing. Honest people can reason with him, so I would be forever acquitted by my judge.
What is he saying?
Not everything that he lost would be given back to him,
Okay,
because he did nothing to deserve it.
okay, he did say that he didn't do anything to deserve it. And what does he want? What does he want from God?
He basically wants a face-to-face.
Exactly.
Reason with him.
And what does he say that in that face-to-face with God, what would happen?
God would give him a fair hearing.
God would give him a fair hearing, and he would end up being what? Acquitted. Okay? Alright, so let's read Job 9, 20 and 22. Through 22.
Though I am in the right, my own mouth would condemn me. Though I am blameless, he would prove me perverse. I am blameless, I regard not myself, I loathe my life. It is all one, therefore I say, though he destroys both the blameless and the wicked.
So what is he doing here?
Still saying that he's in the right, but God's doing whatever he's doing.
And so he's really saying that God's correction is on what kind of a person. And you said it.
Blameless.
Yeah. So he's what is he saying by that?
Reiterating that he didn't do anything
To
bring
cause,
this on,
yeah.
but God destroys the blameless and the wicked.
Okay. Let's look at Job 9, 32 through 33. And how did he say in 29, what did he say about his relationship with God? He felt like he and God were, used a word. Did you catch it?
Intimate friendship.
Friendship. Okay, so let's look at Job 9, 32 through 33.
For he is not a man as I am, that I may answer him, and that we should go to court together. Nor is there any medium between us, who may lay his hand on us both.
What is he saying there?
He's recognizing he's not equal.
he's actually saying, there's no judge between me and God. There's no judge between God and I in the circumstances that I'm going through. So Job 10, 1 through 2, he says, I'm wearing out, God, and he is asking God, where am I wrong? And in Job 10, 7, he says, you know I'm not wicked, but no one can deliver me out of your hand. And then Job 13, 15, we often hear this quoted if you hear a quote from Job, and that's, though he slay me, I will hope in him. And then he goes on to say, nevertheless, I will argue my ways before him. He says in Job 30, 20 to 21, you turn your attention against me. You're cruel to me. And he uses the word that God persecutes him. What is that sense? How would we summarize all of these? And there's plenty more. That's just a sampling of what happens in the first 40 chapters.
It sounds like the bitter cup that Jesus took when he was on his way to crucifixion.
Okay? That's an interesting thought.
Are we talking about what he experienced or how he processed it?
How he processed it.
He's processing it like any of us would.
Or have.
Yeah, I think his righteousness turned into self-righteousness.
Okay, that's a good point. And the longer, we don't know how long it went on. We're not given any sense of time. It's just a period of time. And so that's an interesting thought. So let's go to, if you had to say his bottom line, the bottom line for Job and all of these and plenty more is what? What's his bottom line? I didn't do anything to deserve this. Okay? Okay. His situation is unfair. So turn with me to Job 38 through 42. And in some of those verses, what did Job call for with God? What did he want?
Response.
He wanted a response. Okay? Here's where his response comes. In Job 38 through 42. So let's read 1 through 4.
Then the Lord answered Job out of the storm. He said, who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand.
Okay, what did you think of how God initially responded to Job?
Kinda told him you're nobody.
He told him what?
Told him he's nobody.
Think about what he went through. Does that feel a little harsh?
I feel like he's giving Job perspective on not necessarily you're worthless, but remember who I am as the creator and Lord, master of this universe.
You're exactly right. That's exactly what he is doing. And as he tells him who he is, we're gonna see how Job responds in that, okay?
More like a reality check.
Okay?
It was like,
He did the same thing with Moses, to
Well,
end of the burning bush.
well, that's true.
'Cause he's like, hey. I am.
Yeah. So he's basically telling me, tell me if you have understanding. And Job asked for a hearing before God. Well, guess what? God showed up for that hearing. And here he is.
That would be slightly terrifying.
Right? So let's read what he says so chapters 38 through 42, just a couple places where Job talks, but it's all God talking to Job. So, but what does 38:12 say?
Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place?
He's asking Job a question. And these two chapters, if you read through this, these two chapters are all about God's role in creation. And so in the middle of these chapters about creation, him describing creation, then he pauses and says to Job, have you ever commanded the morning? okay? So,
Jen, no?
Yep.
But, I mean, just, it's in the same vein, but kinda backing up when he says, when God tells him, brace yourself like a man.
yeah,
He's saying, feet shoulder width apart, flex at the knees.
Thank you.
Fighting stance.
yeah, thank
And
you.
that's how he's coming at you.
Really good point, thank
Yeah.
you, very good point. Okay, so look at 38:21, thank you for that, Ed. What is, again, here's God talking to Job, and what does he say in 38:21?
Surely you know, for you were already born, you have lived so many years.
So he's been describing creation, and then he pauses, and he goes, surely you know. And there's almost sarcasm in the way that he's talking to him. Surely you know, and the number of your days is great, and what is the number of God's days?
Infinite.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, look at Job 42.
Shall the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? He who rebukes God, let him answer it.
So here he says, mine uses fault finder.
Yeah.
Will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? And he's reproving God, answer him? So let's see how Job responds to this, okay? In his position that Ed pointed out. What does he say in verse 4?
I am unworthy.
5:2.
How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth.
And 5 also.
I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more.
So in the way that God described his role in creation and all the characteristics of his own to create the world that he lived in, Job, after 2 chapters of listening, says what?
Essentially.
I'm gonna quit talking.
Yeah. Okay, but God's not done. So, let's look at verse 7 and 8. Here we go again, Ed.
Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be in the right?
Okay, and then he's gonna go from that point. And what is he doing? Each time he talks to Job this way, what is he doing? He is
Yeah.
humbling him.
Trying to take away his pride.
Yep.
Job's pride.
I'm still hung up on the like a man thing, because I think there's a couple of different ways you can read that. The way you read it, or it's almost God saying,
So mine, dress for action,
Well, yes.
Hebrew, gird your loins.
well, maybe my interpretation doesn't translate.
I just looked, I was like, hey, what's this? Hebrew, gird up your loins, boys.
Cause okay. Well, the way I read it.
That's how it should just read. Read
Exactly.
that way.
Well, it's like, you can't handle what's coming at you because you're a man. Like,
And I think that's part of that, which
Well,
is
no.
exactly why he's doing that in creation. But I think this is the way that Ed interpreted it is exactly, it's like,
It's not a
Be a
casual
man.
meeting.
Well,
No.
it is, it's good, well, I mean, gird your loins
Exactly.
is that exact, but it's like this whole, like the whole taking everything away from him was seeing if they could break Job. Right? So Job answers the wrong way right here, and
Or-
and got lost.
was it exposing to him something he didn't know about himself because he was a good guy? And in his loss, did it expose some things that he had pride operating in his life in a way that he really didn't think or see or know?
I mean, well, you kind of see it the way he described his life, the way he talked about how people were respecting his word, and then he wore it like a cloak, like clothing. So it was part of him, and it made him who he was. He was saying his relationship with God. He was supposed to say his relationship with God made him who he was, but he was saying how people respected him made him what he was like, and was saying his relation. It was taking a step back and saying that relationship made him what he was with people, amongst people. So his pride got in the way of that relationship.
So if we would read the next 2 chapters, he's gonna talk about all the animals he made in creation, and he's again going to be talking to Job in the same fashion as the other 2 chapters. So let's look at Job 42, 2 through 5, and see how Job responds.
I know that thou canst do all things, and that no purpose of thine can be thwarted. Who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have declared that which I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear now, and I will speak. I will ask thee, and do thou instruct me. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, and now I see, or my eyes see thee.
One more verse.
Therefore I retract, and I repent in dust and ashes.
What is he repenting, retracting? What is he taking back?
Saying he wants to have an honest hearing for everything, why he lost everything. He's like, you know what, I really don't need that.
That's true. Here's a guy who was a good guy. And God caused or allowed events to take place in his life that he thought would never take place in his life. And he had that bitter pill of, I don't deserve this. And that's what rose up in him, is that bitterness, and I didn't do anything to deserve it. He had that 1 + 1 mentality of, I live this way as a Christian, God's gonna do this, and it's gonna equal this with my life. Where does that happen? Not here. And Job believed that it happened here. And he got to know God in a way he did not know him before, because God humbled him to see God for who he was. Okay, that's where we're gonna stop for tonight. Any other thoughts? Anything you want to? Yes, ma'am.
So when she read.
Who's she? Dawn?
No, who was?
Oh, Elaine? Okay.
I was gonna say.
This
Okay.
last
Yeah,
This
when
last
she
sec-
was reading the last one, she said, hold on. So 42 verse 5 and 6,
Uh-huh.
I've heard, of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you, therefore I pour myself repent dust. When she read that, it was just like, cause when I read through Revelation, we have gone through that, I think,
You read through it
first
last
Bible
year.
study,
Yeah.
or the last Bible study, we went through Revelation a little bit, right? I always wondered what it, cause he repeatedly says, he who has eyes, let him see, he who has ears, let him hear. And I always wondered why he was always saying that phrase, and I saw this right here, it was like, wow, so it brings it back to, humility, because Job had to go through all of what he went through to be humbled, and then here's where he says, now I understand, and now I have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. So it puts it into a really big understanding for me as to why God repeatedly has that in Revelation. Who has eyes, let him see, and he who has ears, let him hear.
That's a good point. And along that point, he's saying, I thought I knew you, I heard of you before. But the barrier between him knowing truly God was his pride. Okay, now that we've ended on a highlight.
Well, in the homework, when you had us read through chapter 29 and write down all the stuff that he remembered about himself and his relationship with the Lord, there were so many things, you know, that God watched over him, gave direction, friendship, blessed highly, respected, helped the poor, the orphans, the widow, the blessed, the blind, the lame, father to the needy, clothed in righteousness. And as I thought, as I listed everything that he said about himself in his past with God, and then your question was, what sense do you get? Well, he thinks pretty highly of himself. Honestly.
Yeah.
And so I think he still knows who God is, and he knows and respects his authority, but he expects him to meet him and have this discussion because I don't deserve this.
Exactly, and I deserve the life that I saw,
Right.
and I deserve that life. And there's experiences that we can go through in life that can have the intention of humbling us. It may have other reasons, and I can say there's one experience in my life that has taken me a while to get to the point that I go, that's part of the reason for that experience. An incredibly painful experience. And that's part of the reason. It's not the only reason, but it's part of the reason.
I think you learn about Christ's nature when you walk through something, you know, just like you had a better understanding or a new understanding. I mean, I'm sure people, I mean, myself included, when you walk through a season that's particularly difficult, you end up on the other side of it having some kind of enlightenment, like the Lord's taught you something in that moment. Paul says to be thankful and joyful in those trials, because you have so many wonderful things that come from it, even though it doesn't feel very wonderful. That I hadn't tied that to James and Job. I hadn't pulled those together until tonight. But
Yeah.
those are,
It's really important for us to see that in our own lives. And you are right. We shed some things. When we go through those fires, we shed some things. And we don't come out of those situations the same way that we walked in.
And you know, he had no reason to be bitter with God prior to all of this. But he developed that bitterness and it got worse and worse. And I mean, it's kind of like the weed in Jonah. You know, why do you have bitterness about the weed? I'm the one that put the weed there for your shade, and then I'm the one that takes it away. I mean, it's the bitterness, and I was glad you pointed that out because I had not seen that all the bitterness that he allowed to fester.
Well,
And
to
it just-
tie that into
Go ahead.
today's times even, one of the biggest questions I think that the world asks all the time, because I know I get it, is why, if there's a God, why do bad things happen to good people?
And that's, you know what, and we ask the same question. When we go through stuff that we don't
What did I
understand,
do wrong?
exactly, and that's exactly what his friends were telling him. You had, come on, fess up, you did something to cause this. And if you say you're sorry to God, he's gonna fix it. And that's the mindset, and I think there's mystery attached to it. And then there's the element of trust. And that is, I'm gonna walk through this with you, because you know what you're doing. But that goes back to that surrendered life, and that he has a different life than what we think he might have for us. And what are we gonna do with that? Okay, you guys get a ponder, just like I've been pondering.
Ponder from yonder.
Yeah, okay. So, would somebody like to pray?
thank you, Father, for just showing us what you want us to understand and learn. And we recognize that you are moving in the direction that's really just opening us up to understand who you are and who you want us to be in your kingdom. And I just want to thank you for that. Thank you for Jana and her leadership and the time that she's given to pour herself into this study for our sake, but mostly for your sake and for your glory. Amen.
Okay, I got one question that's
Sure.
very irrelevant to what we're doing with the study and everything. but
Okay,
What does one person need with 6,000 camels?